Labhuram, who is okay. Thank you for notifying me that. So uh, our instructor today is Amarjit Labhuram. He's co-founder of Macrosec Limited, which is a cybersecurity consultancy firm based here in Nairobi, Kenya, with very global reputation, of course. And today he's going to be taking us through Active Directory. He will introduce himself. He wears many hats, and I think it will only be fair that he introduces himself. But from a personal level, I would like to say that I call him Labu. Labu is a very good friend of mine, and I feel elated that we have achieved this so far in cybersecurity per se in general, and the fact that he is with us here on this particular session, I really feel proud, and I look forward to learning. I mentioned to him a while back that I was really much interested in learning about Active Directory, and I'm happy that January of 2022, I get to start my journey into Active Directory. So Labu, I won't say so much. I'll let you take over, and we hope that the rest of us are going to enjoy the session. Thank you very much.
Fuck you.
Thank you, Jones. Thank you, Jones, for that. Let me just hold on. Okay, I don't know why I can't share my screen. Okay, let me just exit and come back 1 sec.
Okay, while he gets back, sometimes technology is very interesting. And I normally say this because, especially when you're into conducting demos, conducting training, sometimes machines fail. I remember a while back when we were holding the Africa Hackon CTF competition, sometimes last year. So I happened to delete a very important partition on my laptop. So I had to come up with a plan on how basically we are going to run the CTF. And it's not that because I was a noob when it came to handling such machines. It's just that, well, sometimes things happen, for lack of a better word. Let me use things, or for ethical purposes and morality, things happen. So hoping that he comes back in good time. But meanwhile, let me mention that we are really working hard in ensuring that 100 Days of Hacking is successful, in the sense that we are hoping to partner with more individuals or organizations that are willing to offer services or resources to ensure that this particular endeavor comes through. And one very important organization that we're dealing with is Cyber Rangers, whom can see even Lawrence has joined us. So Cyber Rangers is an organization that has freely offered to facilitate the technical training aspect, whereby they'll be providing hands-on labs. And I'm very happy that Lawrence is here, who actually have made this possible. So while we move forward, I believe we'll have more organizations or individuals come on board. Also, I would like to mention that while we are focused on offering technical training, it's also important that we enrich ourselves and our minds with regard to non-technical aspect of cybersecurity. Remember that cybersecurity also involves a lot of burnouts, especially if you're not mentally fit or psychologically prepared to proceed. So with that regard, we'll be holding sessions where we'll invite guest speakers to come and share their experience in cybersecurity, how they've been able to remain healthy, how they've been able to remain sane, especially the sane part, because trust me, sometimes things get so hard that it may be difficult to exactly tell whether you're sane or insane. I can see Labu is back, so I won't say so much. Labu, if you can hear me, please confirm. You can also see your screen, which is a good thing. Labu, if you can hear me. Sultan, please mute your mic, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. I think he's still having some issues, so we'll let him fix that. Okay, we'll be having sessions where we'll invite guests to come and speak to us, so that we can also get their experience and how this experience has shaped their stay in cybersecurity. Furthermore, we'll be holding technical kind of sessions where we'll be having run-throughs on labs, let's say in Really Try Hack Me or Hack the Box or CTF Room on cyber ranges, so that we get to make practical what we've learned. So, Labu, I don't know whether you're able to hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen. So please
Awesome.
take it.
All right. Thank you very much. Sorry about that tech sometimes.
I understand. Thank you.
So thanks for the introductions, Jones. I'll just give a brief about myself. My name's Amarjit Labhuram. I'm a co-founder and the technical director at Macrosec Limited. I am a cybersecurity researcher, more on the in, offensive security. So pen testing and red teaming is some things that I do regularly. And because of that, I'm more of an offensive security lover. I still do like defense and stuff, because reverse engineering and everything, understanding also your own tradecraft and how you can be tracked makes sense. So I wouldn't say I'm fully offensive. I think there's a term now Jones uses as well called purple teaming, where you're a bit on both sides of the fence. But I would say I still lean more towards the offensive side. My hobbies are farming, fishing, DJing of electronic music, foodie, and I love coffee. So if you follow me on some of my socials, you might see a lot of that. On the screen, you can see my Twitter handle. So if anybody wants to reach out to me on Twitter, you can use that handle. So Active Directory. Active Directory is a directory service that runs on Microsoft Windows servers. And the main function of Active Directory is to enable administrators to manage permissions, control access to networks and resources. The AD domain services also provide additional features such as single sign-on, security certificates, LDAP, Light Directory Access Protocol, and access right management. So in large institutions where they have hundreds of users and lots of endpoints being computers to manage, it's very difficult for a system administrator to go around and looking at everything that's happening on each and every machine. Some of these machines may be also set up at remote sites. So Active Directory gives administrators the power to be able to manage these endpoints and these users through the AD services, and basically having policies and controls on how various users will access various resources on a network. So when it comes to red team, it was very good. Jones had a session with you guys last week on red teaming and introduced Windows internals. And the next bit, once you understand Windows systems, because most environments, corporate networks would be running Windows machines for their users, they will tend to have Active Directory managing these endpoints. So definitely when it comes to red teaming, the understanding of Windows is key. And once you understand Windows, the next thing would be to understand Active Directory, because that's your next level of abuse to maybe move around a network. So basically, this is also what ransomware and advanced, what they call ATPs, advanced threat, APTs, advanced persistent threats. So these are maybe nation state agents, as you may have heard from Jones saying, they attack infrastructure and networks, either governments or organizations, to try and get some specific data. That's where, if it's an APT, some of them are the ransomware groups. So if they're able to access the domain controller from there, they can easily spread the ransomware throughout the entire network and cripple the organization. So the AD plays a very large role in the management of resources in large networks. Now, given that increasingly more organizations are shifting their business operations to the cloud, Microsoft introduced Azure Active Directory, or known as Azure AD, which is basically a cloud-based version of the Windows AD. By the way, when I say AD, it stands for Active Directory. So going forward, I'll be using that acronym. When cloud, so some infrastructures have been set up with what's called a hybrid. So hybrid means there's an on-premise Windows Active Directory as well as the Azure cloud version running, and they synchronize with one another. And then what we're going to discuss now is more of the on-prem, which is the on-premise, what you'd install on your Windows server in your internal network. So Azure is a very different management tool. It's the new thing that it's Microsoft's new baby. So they focus a lot on that. Therefore, even with the advancement of Windows Server 2022, which has just recently been released, there's still a lot of the legacy vulnerabilities within it from like default configurations. So for today's session, we'll be looking at Windows Server 2019, but feel free to play around with anything from, I'd always say anything 2016 and above, because a lot of environments will have that. You can also play around with Server 2012, but from 2016 to 2019, I can say, and even 2022, the architecture and setup and configs are pretty much the same. So uh, just in your labs, you can use that. For today's session, there's a lab that has been set up by Cyber Rangers. So that will be using Server 2016. So for those of you who do not have enough resources on the Discord, we have a Discord channel. Uh, I think the link will be dropped there, or I think no, it will be dropped in the meeting chat. So look out for the link to the Cyber Rangers session. And unfortunately, it's only accessible to 28 people. There's a limit to the number of people who can access it. So it's going to be on a first come, first serve basis. In fact, let me just put the link so people, whoever wants to do it, can start registering. Where was it? So this is the Cyber Rangers link. Just give me 1 second. Okay, maybe I'll drop the link further ahead as we go on. So going back to our slides. So that's basically what Active Directory is. Now, when it comes to Active Directory, or basically not even Active Directory, but organizations, you have organizations that have various divisions, maybe even it's like, say, Macrosec, which you can see over here on the left, has bought out another company called Techno. So instead of like shifting hundreds or thousands of users from one domain to another and then managing from one single infrastructure, Active Directory has what's the capacity called trust relationships. So if you look on the left-hand tree, you can see there's at the top, this is what we would call a root forest, is macrosec.local. And then below that, there's two other forests, which is sales.macrosec and accounts.macrosec. Basically, that these two are child domains of this root domain. So you have a root which would tend to be the primary head node, and this usually tends to manage the ones that go below it. So it can be the primary domain controller, and then a primary domain, which then sends policies that these other ones have, and then these may have fine-grained policies based on departmental. So maybe this was a large organization that had another domain for their accounts division, so they can have their policies completely set up. Or maybe this accounts is in a different building in another location. So these ADs can communicate with one another. And then you have now the way I said macrosec buying out another company called techno.local, which also has its own subset or child domains. This direct root domain to root domain is called a domain forest trust relationship. So usually this is called an external trust, meaning an external domain is trusting another external domain. Whereas, as I said, these smaller arrows going down would be called child parent-child relationship, parent-child domains. So the key things to know here are terms like tree, forest, and trusts. So basically, what you can see at the bottom here, where you have the techno site, you will see techno, sec.techno, and dev.techno. That's a domain tree. So from the root domain being techno, and then these children domains, this whole becomes a tree. Now, the next bit would be the forest. So if this techno bit was a tree and the macrosec is another tree, if you combine multiple trees, you start getting a forest. So that's sort of how, if you can visually try and picture what how Active Directory domains interoperate. Then you have the trusts. So as I mentioned, there's the parent and child domains that are automatically linked by trust. And then that would now give users in different domains can access these trusts to access resources in another domain. So let's say the way I said the example of the accounts in macrosec, maybe there's somebody in accounts who needs to access a printer or a server in the macrosec.local domain. They would be able to do that directly because of the parent-child trust relationship, which tends to be what we call transitive. I won't go too much into details on trusts because that's a very large concept or topic on its own, but it's good to understand how these ADs also operate. And another thing about these forest domains and trees and stuff, there's something else called a global catalog. Because the Active Directory behaves like an index, think of like a library that has a knowledge of all the books and each shelf that book belongs to. So that's what we'd call a global catalog. So it knows where each of the resources are and all the types of authenticate access rights that each individual resource on that domain has. So a global catalog is another thing to remember when in these terminologies. Now, other terminologies are objects. So in Active Directory, data is stored as objects, which include users, groups, applications, and devices. And these objects are categorized to their names and attributes. So a user would be an object on a domain control in an Active Directory domain. Computer would be another object. So any resource groups are identified as objects. So it's like the high end grouping. Then you have organizational units. So an OU is used to organize users, groups, and computers and other organizational units together. So you can have chained OUs where one OU belongs to this into another OU. And as I said, OU, for example, let's say the one for the macrosec.local. Instead of having accounts.local as a whole new domain, you had the accounts department in your Active Directory. We'll go through these things also visually, but I'll just give a brief explanation. So you can have your entire accounts team, you can have your IT team and have separate policies be applied on those organizational units. So like your IT department can become an organizational unit, and an OU contains objects. So that can be either IT workstations or endpoints, or it could also be the IT users or members of staff. So that's what an OU is. And then you can have OUs that have nesting. So maybe you have IT and then you have your admins as a different OU and your system analysts or what department subsection of IT as a separate. So you can fine grain your organizational units so that you can manage them to what you want them to do, the policies. Groups. So just as the name suggests, there are two types of objects. So there's security groups and there's distribution groups. Sorry, I think that was a typo. It's supposed to be there are two types of groups. So security group and distribution group. Security group is a group that of users and accounts that can be used to provide access to resources, while a distribution group are those used mainly for like email distribution. So in our instance, we're going to be dealing a lot more with the security groups or more than distribution groups. Um, Users. So a domain user is one whose username and password are stored on the domain controller rather than on the computers that users log into. Now, another thing to keep in mind in the domain context or in an AD context, a user can be a human user or a machine user account. So when a machine is created on the domain controller, there's going to be a machine object, and there's also going to be a machine user corresponding to that machine that has been added to the domain. So that's something to remember. So as an endpoint or a computer, it can have two objects. It can be a computer on the domain, or it can also be a machine account on the domain. I hope that's clear. If anyone has questions, there are just a few more slides, and then we can do the questions based on that, and then go into the building of the labs and going through the cyber ranges. So computers, as I mentioned, so each domain joined machine has an account. So the computer accounts are used in the same way that user accounts are used. That means to authenticate and get access to certain resources. Each computer has a SID, which is known security identification, and attributes when you create it on the domain. So each computer container is created with all these attributes, just like how a normal user's account would be generated with these attributes. Then we have group policies. So group policies allow us system administrators to centrally manage all the users and computer settings. You can use this to set, password policies, auditing policies, mapping of drives. You can do scripts, startup scripts, shutdown scripts, multiple connection to resources. So based on group policies, you can set up how a user or an endpoint is supposed to behave in that network. Another key component of the Active Directory is because of the nature of the activities it does is the access control lists or basically access management, because that's the key role that an AD plays in networks. So access control lists are those settings that define who gets to access which specific object, along with the types of access it has in Active Directory. So you could find, okay, I'll go that into details visually in the next slide so that it may make better sense. So you have ACEs. So these are settings. So access control entries are called ACEs. So you have access control lists, which are the list itself, and then access control entries, which are the individual entries that are set up in these ACLs. So these are the ones that now are used to enable auditing on objects being computers or users. Now, each access control entry refers to a security principle. As mentioned, it's either user groups or processes, and defines the object access rights. So are they allowed or denied for them to do something on that particular principle? So ACLs are highly flexible, and more ACs can be added as when and needed. So to define that a little bit better, I'll just use this diagram. So the access control list. So Max Weber is a user, and it has the security identifier. So that's what the SID is. And a user, as mentioned earlier, is basically an object on the Active Directory domain. So this object will then contain an access control list. So this access control list will probably say this user Max Weber is a member of the admin users and domain users. So that membership bit, because it now contains what sort of rights they have, because them being an admin user will of course have privileged rights. So those rights then get inherited by Max Weber. So that's what an access control list is. It basically gives you the rights that a particular object has. I hope that is clearer. And then with that, we can start building our lab. So if there's any questions, we can answer this. Okay, so there's nothing on the chat. Feel free to, I don't know if everyone has the ability to unmute when they want. Jones, is that how the setting is?
Yes, they're able to unmute. So, but what we normally request is that if someone wishes to say something, they raise up their hands, then the host or the trainer will be able to pick them up.
Okay, perfect. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Meanwhile, I'm just getting the link for the cyber ranges. Just give me 1 sec. Oh, the slides could not be seen. Okay. So I'm dropping the link to the cyber ranges. So for you to be able to access it, you'll need to register onto the cyber ranges. And then once you register, you can use this link to then access the room. Once you have access to the room, if you're one of the lucky 28 users, then you can then follow on. And this I would suggest if anybody doesn't have the resources to spin up virtual machines, because now the next part where I'm building the lab, video resolution. Michael, I hope that's better for the visual. I don't know if you can see my screen though. I've stopped presenting at the moment. Yeah, so I was mentioning um, for the cyber ranges, once you sign up, then you'll be able to access the range where you'll be able to build an AD lab. But it's a very small bit of what I'm actually going to cover today. So for the session, for those of you who don't have hardware to be able to spin up virtual machines, you need, literally for this thing, you need just 2 virtual machines. You need one for the AD server, and I mean the Microsoft Windows server, and uh, one for the, what do you call it, the Windows machine. So I'll show you my setup in a bit, but let me first share the cyber ranges details. So once you log into cyber ranges, let me share my screen again. So once you log in, I hope my screen is visible. I believe it is. So once you log into cyber ranges, this is how it looks. And for you to be able to access the machines for that range, you'll need to download. So if you're using Kali, for instance, I mean Windows, you can download the VPN client. There's a Windows VPN client that will give you access to the lab. If you're using a Linux flavor, you can download the VPN or OVPN client configurations and use OpenVPN or whatever you want to log in. So that's how you'll be able to access the range. And as I said, once you've registered, then using that link, you'll get to, it'll bring you to this, which is the Active Directory Setup Windows Server 2016 Cyber Range. And there's a bit of a rules of what you're supposed to do and what you can't do. And there's also a video instruction on how to access the range. So how to use those VPN configurations that I shared, and what would be the IP address of the machine once it's spun up, the user login, and the credentials for that user. And alongside with it, there is this attachments, which if you download, it's basically this guide that will give you full steps on how to set up the AD on cyber range. So very handy guide you can use for setting up these things. And along with that, I have also my blog, which is pretty much similar to what the guide has, plus more. So I'll share this link as well in the chat so that you can follow along. So once you have the lab set up and all, you come to servers and you'll start up it'll give you I've already started up my environment. So it'll give you an option to start. Once it starts, you'll come to servers. It'll give you the servers are up and the IP address. So as mentioned earlier, let me just quickly switch to sharing to entire screen. I hope you can see my Kali machine. Somebody please say that if they can.
Yes, you can.
So okay, so for the cyber ranges, once you've got downloaded your VPN client, preferably I use Unix when I'm doing these things. So I'll just cd to where I saved it. So I use OpenVPN. So if you're using Kali, OpenVPN comes with it, and you can use once you've downloaded the OVPN file that I showed you, and you use OpenVPN, it connects, and you have your connection to that VPN service. And yeah, I think that. So using our desktop, you can connect to that Windows machine. So from here, whoever is going to be using the cyber ranges, you'll be able to follow along, right? If anyone has any questions on cyber ranges, just raise your hand now, and I'll try and help you however much possible. And then in the next 3 minutes, we'll then continue with the main process, which is now I use VirtualBox for setting up my environment. So I'll be showing you how to set up your lab on VirtualBox. So if anyone has any questions on cyber ranges, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll try and answer to the best I can. Is the room full? Let me just check. Yes, unfortunately, it seems like all slots have been taken. So to those of you who couldn't make it, I'm sorry about that. But Lawrence may be on the session later on. He may be able to guide us on what can be done about that. Otherwise, as I said, I'm going to be showing you how to set it up on your own hardware, on your own machines using VirtualBox. So we can start with that. Okay, so I'm done with this. Back to this later. So we're done with this. We've done cyber ranges. I've shown you that. How to download. So once you log in, as I said, you can go to your user profile. And from your profile, you can then get your VPN client from here. I mean, your configuration file from here. Okay, so for those of you who have managed to get, let's see, sorry, not this one. Yeah. So for those of you who will be in the cyber ranges bit, basically this is now where you'll be, and you can follow along for the next segment. And then again, you'll just have to now watch the YouTube recording to do the other bits that I do later on. So, so basically what I have here, let me just stop this. I need to show you the network. So for those of you who are using um, VirtualBox, I have a link to a blog you can use as well to do this. So for those of you who are asking what sort of virtual machines you need to spin up, for this lab, you need two virtual machines. One would be running Windows Server 2019, and the other would be running a Windows 10 machine. So you have at least one machine that joined to the domain, and you have the domain controller running on the Windows Server. On the blog post, there's a link to where you can download the Windows Server 2019 and Windows 10. And for my VirtualBox setup, I have used Windows Server 2019 with one processor, 2 GB of RAM, and 20 gig of hard drive. Whereas for the Windows 10, okay, in this one I was using two machines, but basically you need one processor, 2 GB of RAM, and 20 gig for your Windows 10 machine as well. So that's what I have. Sorry, here. If you go to settings, I think this ones have beefed them up a little bit, but you can do, yeah, 2 GB of RAM and one processor should be more than enough for this. And this is my Windows Server 2019. I'm going to be creating a lab called aceme.local for this session. What I needed you to do is to set up your networks. So for those of you doing VirtualBox, we'll be using two adapters. The first adapter will be NATed, and this will give internet access directly to the machines. If you want to update or use, like, with Windows, try and play around against Windows Defender that comes inbuilt with these devices. So fully updated and all, you can use it that. If you don't need it, you can disable this. And then for your second adapter, this one usually comes default. You can disable from just clicking that. The second adapter, make sure it's enabled and set to internal network. And then you might get a blank name like that. For mine, I've just, because
Excuse me,
I'm
Labu.
using, yeah.
Sorry for the interruption. We are not able to see your screen, or I am
Oh,
not able to see your screen.
oops. Sorry.
Okay.
All this time I thought I was talking and sharing my screen.
So, apologies for that.
So yeah, as mentioned earlier, for those ones who are looking at the blog, this is where I was getting those details for what I've set up for my devices, but I'm showing that here as well. So I have a Windows Server 2019 and a Windows 10 machine set up here. And when you come to settings, this is in VirtualBox. When you come to network, I have set up two adapters for each machine, as mentioned earlier. So adapter 1 is the one which connects to NAT and gives internet access to this device. Adapter 2 is what will be used to communicate between the server and the other PC that's going to be joining the domain. So I've set the network to internal network, and then you can name this whatever you want. So but as long as you use the same name for the other machine as well. So I've just named this VBox Lab, and basically that's the network configuration there. So far, I've just installed a base installation of Windows Server 2019 on this, but I've not yet set up anything else on it. On this instance, it's just a Windows 10 machine, set up similar to the other in terms of networking, NAT on adapter 1 and internal network to VBox Lab on adapter 2. And yeah, it's not a domain joined machine. So it's just, as we'll see, we'll set it up as we go along. So just start this up. So as I mentioned, this is just a clean domain controller. I mean, Windows Server with nothing, no services or services enrolled on it. And I'll need to set up the, what do you call it? The network for this. And another key thing, when you set up your machine for the first time, it usually has a weird random name. So just for purposes of making things simpler, before you create your domain controller, I advise people to change the computer name. So as mentioned earlier, we're going to change the computer name, and we're also going to change the network settings. So remember, we have two network cards on this machine. So the first one is the one which gives internet access. You can disable this if you don't want internet from here, or you can do it at the network configuration on VirtualBox. So this is the Ethernet 2 is the one I'm more interested in right now to set up the IP for this server. So I'll assign it 10.1. It's 50. 255.250.1.1.0. And for the DNS, I'll set this to be itself because a domain controller will also initially, when you're setting it up, it will also install the DNS service role because it needs to be able to resolve the computer names on the network. So when you're setting it up, you can set itself to be the DNS server so it knows what machines are on the domain as well. Can be able to resolve the names. So that should be how your network for that card should look like. And as mentioned earlier, it's going to install these as well. So just give me a sec. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'll change the computer name for this server. Manager. Come to local server. So now at local server, you should be able to populate the IP we've configured and of course change the name. So let the network information. So we give it the 10.10.1.50. As you can see, it has picked that up. This is where I'm saying we're going to change this to, should we call it DC? Yeah, domain controller. So we'll just call it DC. Right now, we don't have any domain, so we're just going to change that name for as is and restart, and we should be able to now start installing the services. So as this is rebooting, I'll also boot up the Windows machine and make sure that all the settings are there for it to be able to connect to that server. So at this point, it would be exactly like how the guys on the cyber ranges would be doing. So you can now, whoever is on the cyber ranges, you can follow along because we are now going to start installing the AD services. Cool. So it's full screen. So you click on, once you boot up, you get the server manager dashboard loading. You click on add roles and features. It'll ask you a few things. For now, you can just ignore that. We're doing a role-based feature-based installation. And you can see our computer. So this is the one. And you can see it has the two IPs because it has two network cards. So that's fine as long as the 10.1.1.50 is there. Then from the rules we want to add, as I mentioned, you don't need to select DNS. It will do that automatically the moment you select Active Directory domain services. So it will make sure you include any tools that may be applicable. Click on Add Features. Go on to Next. There's nothing much to be changed here. Since we don't have Azure the domain services, we don't need to do anything here. Click on Next. So we'll be brought up with this screen that has all these steps, and we'll say restart destination server automatically if required. Just click on yes and click on install. So now at this point, it may take about 3 to 5 minutes, again, depending on your hardware and your configuration setup, but I don't think it takes more than 5 minutes to install. So while that is doing here, I'll just go switch over to any questions that guys may have. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the slots are full for cyber ranges. So for those of you in the lobby, you may not be able to get access. So this is still installing. As I mentioned, I'll just go to the blog. So as mentioned, in the blog, it also gives you how to configure your IP for your server and the steps to proceed with setting up the AD services. So at the moment, we have reached this point of installation, and then from there we'll proceed with now the actual deployment of the domain controller. So a few more seconds before this finishes. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Let me just put it in the chat for those of you who want the link. So once that's complete, you'll notice it says here configuration required installation succeeded on DC. So if I close this, at the top corner here, you'll find a yellow triangle has been put up. And now we need to promote this server to a domain controller. So it has sort of created the base environment for the Active Directory services. And of course, for that, it needs a domain controller to be able to do its management. So we now can promote this server to become a DC. So this is where we set up the the name we want and all those kind of things. So if this was a server that was joining or a child domain, so a subset of another domain, you will then use add a domain controller to an existing domain. So that means it could be like in the example we saw earlier, we could be now setting up the accounts.macrosec.local here. So that's when we use this option. But now this being a root forest, it's the first one in our lab, we'll be setting it as a new forest completely. So as mentioned earlier, we'll be calling this domain asme.local. Click on next. Then you'll be given the screen which gives you functional levels for the domain. So if you had, like as I said, this might be the root domain, and then you're having children domain joining, and they might be running lower versions than you currently have, because this is running server 2019, so its compatibility can go downwards. You can set up to what forest and domain functional level you want this to go down up to. So if you know your environment has older servers, you can go down up to server 2008. I'll just leave this for now as is. You will need to set up a directory service restore mode password. This is in case you need to restore your AD. This is a password using the utility for restoration. So give it a strong password that you remember. This is what I mentioned earlier, that DNS service is required for the Active Directory domain service services. So automatically it will do it. There's nothing you need to do on this. You can just click next. It will try and populate the net bias for the domain, for this domain controller. If we see it's sour, we can move on to the next bit. It should be ASME. So that's okay. The rest of the settings from this point onwards are, we're going to leave as the default. So we'll just, as I said, this will just be defaults. This is the review of all the configurations that we have set up, and all. If you need to change, you can go back after reading this, but I'm just leaving it as is. Now, you'll notice for those of you who are doing the cyber range bit, when you go to the next part for this on the prerequisites check, it will give you an issue about the password for the administrator account. If you follow the document that came with the cyber range, if you saw that document, which is this one, it'll tell you what you need to do to go and set up the password for the administrator account if it's a weak password. So you'll notice this popping up in your prerequisites. For ours, since my admin account already has a strong password, it should pass this prerequisites check. And if everything is okay, then it will now start doing the installation of the directory domain services now on this server. So when it reboots, it will now be a fully active domain controller, part of the asme.local. If I say install, it takes a few minutes again to do everything. And once that is complete, it will require reboot. So once again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hands. So don't be alarmed with all the warnings that you see popping up. These are standards that come, but you can go read through them. What could be the problem? But they're just minor warnings. It should not be anything too alarming. So meanwhile, as I said, I have a machine here. So for this one, I'll set it up so that it can, maybe I think I've already. Sorry, that. Okay, so for this to be able to join the domain, remember it needs to be able to communicate to the domain controller, and the domain controller has DNS services to be able to resolve names. So like that name asme.local is part of the domain, which the DNS service is running on. So we'll need to add our domain controller's IP here for DNS services. So with that, that's the network configuration you need to do on your Windows machine to be able to join the domain. Let's see if that's completed. Yeah, so it's rebooting. So once this reboot happens, we'll be having an AD, Active Directory setup. So the next thing is we'll join a machine onto that domain and see the process. First, we'll create we'll join the machine, create a user, and then we'll be able to log into the machine we just joined using the user we create. And with that, then I'll be able to then show you how it all looks within the Windows server environment. Continue. server PC is local. Yeah, so we can resolve the name meaning. Wait, okay, it's using the wrong network card, so I'll just disable that. Come on. Okay, this is hanging. Let's give it a sec. This is still loading. Wow, both machines are hanging now. Yeah, so now I can resolve to that IP of 10.10.1, so that should be able to communicate to the domain controller. If that has come up, which has, and now we should be having a fully running Active Directory domain called asme.local, and this server should be the domain controller on that. So once the server manager loads, I'll show you how that looks with the GUI interface. So we come to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. So once the window opens up, you can see our domain. And when you open this, it gives you now the different objects that are part of this domain. So by default, this is what it sets up. We have a group called users, which has the default users that come with the installation of the AD. As you can see, enterprise admins, domain users. So some of them are groups, some of them are users themselves. So the administrator, of course, is a user. Guest is a user. The rest are security groups. This is what we talked about when we're talking of groups. We're not going to be using distribution groups, but security groups for our talks moving forward. So for this domain, I'll just create a new user so that we have a user with which we'll use to log in to the machine we join. So we'll come to right click, new user. I'll give it the name John, last name Doe, full name that. I'll just use an underscore to use that. Login will be John. So Doe. And we give the password. Then set that as user must not. We don't need this so that the user doesn't have to change the password because we'll be using this. Do not change anything else here. Okay. So we have a user now, John underscore Doe. That's part of the domain. We go to the Windows 10 machine and now add it to the domain. So to do that, let's right click, come to PC, properties, and come to rename this PC advanced. We'll come to change. We'll call this PC01. Domain is where we put the asme.local domain. I will try and communicate to that domain controller. If it is successful, it will ask us to authenticate so that we can add this machine to the domain. So I'll use the administrator account. And if all goes well, we'll be greeted with a message saying that this machine is now part of the domain. So going back to the domain controller, as mentioned, these were users. You can see the computer. Right now, we don't have any computer objects because it has not yet joined. Under domain controllers, we only have this domain controller because the root domain should be the Windows machine saying, welcome to the asme.local domain. If I do this, it'll ask for a reboot. And then from there, it'll be part of it may give you an error because of DNS, that ignore it. Start, close, restart now. So once this machine restarts, it should be part of the domain. And now if you go to computers and refresh, you should have PC01 as part of the domain. So basically, this is how you view the different objects in the domain. So PCs, you have your users and the groups, the domain controllers. Now, foreign security principles, these are other accounts that would, especially the foreign security principles. This comes in when there's like now forest trusts, but as I said, we're just creating the initial root domain. So there's not much that's going to be in this for now. So we have a PC, we have a user. We can see now if we can log into that machine with the user we created. So by default, it will still use the previous one, but you can see it's part of the ASME domain. This is John Doe, and the password we gave it. And now we have authentication into domain. So we have a machine that's part of the domain. I'll just give, since we have some time, I'll go through some few things about now when it comes to the actual exploitation or not even exploitation, but enumeration of AD, because as an attacker, as a pen tester, that's what you want to do when you have access to an environment where it's running. You'd want to be able to tell the ways with which you'd be able to exploit different objects in the environment. So there's the manual process of doing that, which is I'll do that in a later session because it takes long to do everything. But for today's session, we're going to use a tool called Bloodhound that basically is able to map out attack paths that could be possibly there in an Active Directory domain. So we'll do a snapshot of, we'll do a Bloodhound output of our domain controller or our environment as it is right now. And then we're going to use another script called Bad Blood. Basically, it's here. We're going to use this script called Bad Blood to set up vulnerabilities. So basically, what it does is it installs it creates users, groups, and permissions for these users, and within those configurations, a lot of times they have how do you say, vulnerabilities, or because basically when it comes to Active Directory attacking, you're not looking for vulnerabilities meaning CVEs but misconfigurations. So Bad Blood now sets up the environment for you in such a way that it has vulnerable paths to which you can exploit in the domain. So I'll take you through that as soon as this is done. So we're in, and this is a new machine. So sorry, where is it? Yeah. Cool. So I'll come back to, sorry, here. So this is now part of the domain. If we go to hostname, you'll see it's PC01, and yeah, so basically that's a user that's in the domain. Now, as I said, we're going to try and run Bloodhound on this, and I need internet access, so I need to enable. Should ask me for administrator rights. So before I run bad blood, I just want to first take a snapshot. We're going to then take that snapshot to Bloodhound and run the bad blood script in the background, then come back and do another snapshot. So we have network access. Yep. So antivirus looking. This. So a lot of the tools that are already out there in regards to like these Active Directory enumeration or attacking, they're heavily signatured. So automatically, if you try and like download them onto your machines, they will create what do you call it? They will create issues like Windows Defender will start screaming all over. So maybe for this session, just for this, because in initial one, I'll do it with it turned on and probably show you a bit of bypass. One thing I always tell people, make sure you disable on all your Windows machines, you disable sample machine administration. That's for your lab machines, because you may end up creating payloads that then get sent and get signatured. So they won't work when you start doing it on a real engagement, but you can leave the rest on. This is the key one to turn off. It's up to date as at earlier today, so it's pretty much an up to date version of Windows in terms of security. What else is missing? Complaining, this, that. So we have fully running that. So when it comes to Windows, attackers heavily leverage on PowerShell. So some of the things I'm going to show you are going to be PowerShell scripts. And when it comes to PowerShell, because it works a lot in memory, you can run scripts directly in memory of machines. Windows introduced, which I think Chucks touched on it a little bit. It introduced an interface called AMSI, which is the anti-malware scan interface. And a basic demo of how that would work is if I typed AMSI utils, you will see it will tell you it tried to run a malicious command. Is my AV turned on? Because ideally it's not supposed to have allowed me to do that. Interesting. Okay. Let's check that again. Okay. Or let's try. Yeah, as I said, I'm going to be running the Bloodhound script or Sharphound script actually to collect the information we need. So Sharphound is basically an ingester. It's a collector that's used to then populate the information that will be fed to Bloodhound. So right now I'm PowerShell script. Yeah, that raw. Cool. So I take this and I try and run this in memory. Oh, this is slow. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why my VM is misbehaving. So it's new object. So this is supposed to be. Wow, it's really handy. God. Oh, yeah. Web client. String. Duplicates. So if all is successful, it should inject Bloodhound directly to memory using that command. And as you can see, this type, sorry. String. Ideally, your Windows Defender should detect this because this is, yeah, exactly. So as you can see, we've been blocked by AMSI because it detects the running of scripts directly in memory. So to bypass this, it's quite simple. Using PowerShell, you can use this site called amsi.fail. So it's a cool site by a guy called Flankvic. You just click on generate. It gives you new bypasses for AMSI, and there are multiple ones that are there. So we can try this if it works. Oh man. Yeah, so that one would not work. Pick another one. Usually this one by Rastamouse tends to work. So let's give it a shot. And now if I try running, putting that script in memory, we should not get an error. So you can see we have that. And to run, to get an output for this, you just run invoke Bloodhound and -c all, which means collection all. So if you read the Bloodhound tool and what it does, you'll get details of the various switches. For now, we're just getting a collection of all the information from the thing. And usually if it works, you should get a zip file that you can then use to input into Bloodhound. So we have the zip file ready. I'll just leave that there and come back to it. For now, I want to show you how to use Bad Blood to let's see, to set up more objects in your domain so that it becomes more misconfigured for us to attack. So I can show you both the difference between this output and once we have done the Bad Blood. So for Bad Blood, I just need to copy that link, which is this one, to my Windows 10 machine. And I download the zip. Once that is downloaded, I can go to my domain controller to run PC01. Okay, wait, I know what I'll do. I need to share something on this side. Downloaded that, come to downloads. Actually, let me use this, make it easier for myself. I need to get this tool. Good. So I'm just basically using HTTP file server. Yes. Now, so this will set it up. I can now add blood to here, and also there was document. No, C users do, and I want to also send the first Bloodhound output there. So with that, if I go to the domain controller, this 166 add yes. Yeah, so I can download this from here. So once you have bad blood downloaded, extract it on your domain controller. Extract all. So when you open that, you'll see groups of folders, and the main script is this one, invoke bad blood. So the default one has a lot of objects that it adds. So I'm just going to edit this a little bit so that it doesn't take up a lot of it. By default, it will add 2,500 users. So I'll just bring this down to maybe 200. Groups, I'll probably say 50 groups. Computers, I can leave that at 50. And the rest should be okay. So just save that. So to run bad blood, as said in the folder that it is installed in, just open PowerShell and we just run bad blood. So to ask us a few questions, your first tool to mark up your test domain. So yeah, as I mentioned, this really messes up the configurations. Do not do this on a production environment. Make sure it's in your test environment. You don't go and screw up someone's domain. As I said, you can mess things up. So we're going to create 200 users, 50 groups, and 50 computers. And then if you want randomness, you can type bad blood. So it will start creating random groups and stuff like that on your domain. And once that is going, it will start setting that up. While this is being set up, we will go and look at now the Bloodhound output that we got originally. So for that, we'll go into a Kali instance. And Kali usually comes with Bloodhound already pre-installed. For Bloodhound to work, you need Neo4j. It's already because it comes pre-installed. So to start it, you just type Neo4j console. Once it's started, it will tell you that the server is up and you can now access it. And then you can just type Bloodhound and it will create for you. It'll start the Bloodhound application that connects to the Neo4j database. So here you give it the credentials you created when you set up Neo4j for the first time. And also I need to download that Bloodhound output. So here it is. I'll just save it to downloads. And we have Bloodhound now fully loaded. So now we need to bring that zip file that we downloaded into this. Downloads. So one. Slide it here. So this will populate the current configurations of what it found on the database. I mean, on the domain before we ran Bad Blood. So this is still running. It may throw some errors at times, but most of them should not be anything too alarming, because it could be when it's trying to set up a group or something. Previously, this is actually one of the, I think the second or third time I'm running it, so just to see how it works. So the last time I did it, I had much more errors than what you're seeing on the screen, but at that time I created a lot more objects. So maybe that's why, but it looks like it's progressing quite well, should be done a bit. So going back to Bloodhound, once it has uploaded, you'll see that it has completed uploading everything. We click clear finished, and now we come to the database information. You'll see it has a list of things. So users, it gives you the number of computers, groups, and stuff like that that are on this domain. So if we search for that user John, okay, before even doing that. So as I said, the good thing about Bloodhound, it has some pre-built queries. So if we say find all domain admins, it will look for the domain administrators on the network. Okay, click on settings, or the display, so you can please read what's that. So you can see there's just only one administrator at the moment who is a member of the domain admins group. If you want to find the shortest path to domain admins, this means if you want to compromise, how can I compromise this administrator account? So this is how Bloodhound maps out attack paths. Sometimes this thing sort of messes up. So you can see currently the administrator has a session running on this PC01. So if you click on this edge, sorry, if you double click, if you right click on this edge and say click on help, it will tell you what's the current situation. And if there's any way of abusing it, what can be done. So basically, because this administrator is connected or has a session on the PC01, and that session happened the time I was trying to disable antivirus. So the password for the administrator has been stored in memory of this machine called PC01. So there's a possibility that if I have privileged access, I can impersonate the token of the administrator and therefore become a domain administrator on this machine, but which is not the objective of what we're trying to do today. But that just explains how this edge can be sort of abused, or how the output on Bloodhound is read. So at the moment, we don't have much to work with because it's nothing much we've set up on the domain. But now that we have completed Bad Blood, we're going to do an output of another snapshot of this database, of this domain, with these changes in effect. And as you can see, there's some vulnerabilities that Bad Blood starts creating. So you'll start hearing of SPNs. SPN stands for Service Principal Names. So sometimes services can run under user accounts. So they may, because, for example, let's say there's an SQL database running on the network. And when it comes to Windows environments, as Munir had mentioned, sometimes these like stuff like databases run in the context of a user. And again, as we mentioned, a user is an object. An object has access control lists, which means it has the various access levels or rights on the domain. So if you can abuse a service, you can then get the privileges of that service. You can then request for things on the network as that service. But again, that's a topic for another day. It has created another vulnerability called srep for users. We will probably look at that now once we run Bloodhound again. So I'll just run the same thing again. So I need to go back to Windows machine and again run invoke Bloodhound. And if you look at the one, it said it got 58 objects. Now we'll see after running bad blood what, and remember, we're just enumerating. So basically at this point, we are a normal user who does not have privileges, which we can see here. If I try seeing the drives, or I mean, the content of the C drive of the domain controller, it should tell me I do not have permissions. Access denied. Yeah. So you see, I'm a normal user. I'm not a domain. I'm not a high privileged user. Yet I'm able to enumerate things just as this user. So this is what attackers do when we get. If you've been phished, this is how ransomware group actors would try and now leverage the Active Directory to then move laterally and eventually pawn the entire network. So just give it a minute, because now we've added a lot more objects, so it'll take some time. In fact, it has even told us it found a cache file, 91 objects are in this cache. So this was because of the previous run. Let's see how many it will detect this time around. And just to have a look at how once bad blood, as we said, we've run it here. So to see how it looks now in the AD, if we come to tools and then users and computers, you can see now there's other OUs that have been created, like tier 1, which has other objects and multiple. So you can see how nested you can have groups and users and objects within a domain. So it has a lot more that has been added. There's quarantine, stage, testing, these tiers which have these, and each one has an a sub group within it. Are there any other users that were created? No, so we only have the user we created, people, admins. Now you can see there are more admins. If we come to the groups for domain controller users, if we come to the domain administrator group, see if we have other members now. Yeah, so initially it was only one. Now you can see there are 3 other objects. So if we run, if we check the Bloodhound output that we get this time round, we should be able to see those other domain admins. The other time when we did a search for, as we said, for find all domain admins, we only got 1. And this is taking quite some time to finish. Still populating. So as this is populating, maybe I could just take you through the various switches that are there in Bloodhound. So the switches I meant in the collection method. So right now we're using the -C all, which means perform all collection methods except for GPO local group. GPO stands for group policy objects local groups. So it will do all these various types of collections, but it will skip this one, which performs local admin collection using group policy objects. This is a very complex, what do you call it, enumeration, because you're looking through nested policies. So it cannot do it by default within the with the all switch. So the all switch will give you the default one. It will perform group membership allocations. It'll check for who have local admin access, if there's any remote desktop users, uh, distributed COM object users, PowerShell remoting, sessions. Sessions mean, like as I showed you, if the any user has a session running on a machine, the computer only will just look at local admin access, RTP, DCOM, and session collections. So that's if you use this switch on its own. It will check for logged on users. It will check for trusts with domains, access control lists for all objects in the domain controller, the containers that are there. DC only would now mean it's just enumerating on the domain controller only. So another thing is, as I mentioned, because these tools that are used for pen testing or red teaming against AD are heavily signatured, also these sort of like using the default collection method is quite noisy. It creates a lot of events because it's scanning through, as you can see, it's running through multiple scans on the network, trying to see if a user has a session or is has a logon for another account on it. So it will go to every computer object in the domain and try and ask those questions. So it can be very noisy, meaning it can leave a trail. So if there's a defense or a SOC team, they should be able to detect the usage of the of Bloodhound by default, I mean of Sharphound using the default switches. For OPSEC safety, we'll look at that at another time. But as I said, for now, we just wanted to get an output. I don't know why this is refusing. It seems like it has done that. It has a new zip file, which is 193214. This one, I'll add it to HFS. Come to this one, and I'll download this one. Sorry, I'll save. So I want to now upload the new one. So I'll just go to database, clear database. It wipes out all the information. You can see we should have nothing now. If I say warm up or refresh the database, it should now have nothing showing here. As you can see, 0 users are 0 and all. So let's now bring that new one we downloaded, this one. See, hopefully it has collected everything we need. Yep, you can see we have about 194 users, 38 groups, 7 computers, and this is from the same domain now after running Bad Blood. We didn't really set up these accounts or these computer objects. It's just using the script because AD is just a collection of information, just like a library. It knows there's a book that it exists in its records. It doesn't know, this one just doesn't know whether it's there on the shelf or not. So it's just like looking at the catalog in the back end. So once that is finished, now if I go to the queries again, if we did find all domain admins, last time we only had one. You can see now we have multiple objects as we saw. So if you compare this, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you go to our domain controller and check the domain admins group, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Stephanie, Faye, Derek, 303, and administrator, which is the same as what you're getting on Bloodhound. So basically, this is how now you get the Bloodhound output, and you can now start looking for your attack path. So you can look for shortest path to domain admins again. It will start reading through various nested policy, and you can see now how that looks now. So it's quite difficult to read, to map out. But let's say we wanted to get Derek as the main target. So we can say starting node as him. So up here you'll see there's Derek as a path. So you can say target node right now with PC01. So you can see Derek is a member of the domain admins. So being a member of the domain admins, he has generic all rights and admin too. So these are now the, as I said, the different edges that Bloodhound will give you. And when you click on an edge and read the help, it gives you now more information about what it is and how that can be abused, and even the commands one can use to do the abuses. So this is just a sample and an output of how Bloodhound works, and then you can look for. So remember the thing said, um, sorry, not this one, but on the domain controller, it has added srep for a few users. So using Bloodhound, we can look at who are the srep hostable. So these are the various users on the domain that have that use that do not require pre-auth to authenticate. So you can use a tool like Rubius to then request for their password, the encrypted password that you can try and crack offline, which, as I said, will now be when we start looking at attacking the AD. So we still have to do enumeration, but the manual, we're not using Bloodhound. I just wanted to show you Bloodhound for today so that you can start trying to get familiar with it and how it works. The interesting things you can look out for. So for example, if you look at this Rupert Travis as a user, when you click on it, it gives you information about the node, if it has any sessions on any machine, how many high value targets it can access. So if you click on that, so if you gain access as Rupert Travis, you can basically be, you can target these other users. And once you get these users, you can then now target higher. If you get this user, you can see he's a member of the domain admins, that's a member of the enterprise admins. Rupert is a member of the domain users that has this generic all to this group. So you can then look at this edge, see the abuse info, how you can abuse it, and then leverage that to gain control of one of these objects. Once you have this object, then from there, you can escalate to the next bit. So basically, Bloodhound gives you a graphical view of how you can be able to attack the Active Directory. So that was just showing you like reachable high value targets. You can check Enroll group memberships. So this tells you how you may find that if you go to check this Latoya Ford, in fact, let's just do that on the domain control. We're going to find Latoya. If I go to properties and see member of, you can see the various groups that Latoya is directly a member of. So here shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Let's see, when we come here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you notice it didn't show us one. I think there's a default one somewhere. Oh, it's actually here, 11. And again, it's nested to this key admins. So this is one way you can use Bloodhound output to sort of map out what's existing in an Active Directory environment. And I think with that, I'll come to an end to today's session. If anyone has a question, please feel free to unmute and ask, while I also go through the feed if there's any questions. If there are no questions, we can wind up the session for today. Mike? Michael, are you there?
Michael, I think we are not able to hear you. Some static noise in the background. Michael?
I think he's trying to talk, but then there's an issue on his side. Yeah.
Yeah.